The promise that took a lifetime. There was a man named Abraham who had spent most of his life learning how to wait. Not the kind of waiting that fills idle days, but the kind that slowly tests what you believe over years, quietly, relentlessly. He had once been called to leave everything familiar, his land, his people, his security, because God made him a promise that seemed too large to question and too distant to measure, that he would become the father of many nations. At first, that promise carried energy, direction, even excitement. But time has a way of exposing uncertainty. Years passed, then decades. Nothing changed. His body aged, his strength faded, and his wife's laughter at the idea of having a child became sharper, edged with disbelief. Still, Abraham held on, not perfectly, not without doubt, but consistently. The promise didn't disappear, but it didn't arrive either. It lingered, almost like a tension between what was said and what was seen. And then, when the possibility of it ever happening had nearly collapsed under the weight of time, the impossible finally broke through. His son, Isaac, was born. This moment didn't just bring relief, it redefined everything. Isaac wasn't just a child in Abraham's old age. He was the physical confirmation that the voice Abraham had trusted all those years was real, and that delay had never meant absence. Every small detail mattered now. The sound of Isaac's laughter, the way he learned to walk, the simple presence of him in the tent. These weren't ordinary moments. They carried the weight of fulfillment. Because Isaac wasn't just loved as a son, he was held as a promise kept. The command that changed everything. Time settled into something almost peaceful for Abraham. The years of tension had eased, replaced by the quiet rhythm of life with Isaac. The promise was no longer distant. It lived, breathed, and walked beside him. What once required faith now felt tangible. And that's when the unexpected happened. Without warning, God spoke again. The voice was familiar, but the command was not. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, and offer him. There was no explanation, no context, no reason given to soften the weight of it. The request didn't just challenge Abraham, it directly contradicted everything he had been told before. Isaac was the promise. Through him, nations were supposed to come. And now, the same source of that promise was asking for him to be given up. This is where the story shifts. Faith is no longer about waiting, it becomes about surrender. Not to what makes sense, but to what has already proven trustworthy. Abraham didn't respond with arguments or questions. There's no record of hesitation, no visible resistance, just silence and then action. That silence matters because it shows something deeper than emotion. It shows decision. The kind of decision that doesn't rely on understanding, but on trust built over time. The weight of obedience. The next morning, Abraham didn't delay. He rose early before the day could fully begin, as if postponing it might weaken his resolve. There's something precise about that detail. It suggests this wasn't an emotional reaction but a settled decision. He prepared quietly, saddled the donkey, gathered wood for the offering, and called for Isaac. No announcement, no explanation, just movement. Everything looked ordinary on the surface. A father and son setting out on a journey. But beneath that simplicity was a weight Isaac couldn't see and Abraham couldn't share. Every step forward carried tension, the kind that builds not from fear of the unknown, but from clarity about what lies ahead. Abraham wasn't walking into uncertainty. He was walking toward a command he fully understood. What makes this moment difficult is just the action, it's the silence. Abraham carries the knowledge alone. He speaks when necessary, but nothing more. No outward struggle, no visible collapse, just controlled obedience. Faith here isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet, deliberate, and heavy. And with every step, turning back was still possible, but he didn't. The journey into silence. For 3 days, Abraham walked with Isaac toward the place he had been shown. 3 days is not a short journey. It's enough time for doubt to grow, for second thoughts to take shape, for any rational part of the mind to push back. And yet the text remains quiet. No recorded arguments, no visible hesitation. Just distance, steadily closing. That distance matters, because this wasn't an impulsive act, it was sustained obedience. Each day gave Abraham another opportunity to reconsider, to reinterpret what he had heard, or to simply stop. But he didn't. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of tension held under control. Isaac walked beside him, unaware of the weight his father carried. There's an ordinary rhythm to the journey, walking, resting, continuing, yet everything about it is layered with meaning. The longer it went on, the clearer it became. This was no misunderstanding. This was intentional. By the time they saw the mountain in the distance, the decision had already been made long before they arrived. The question that cut through. As they drew closer to the mountain, Isaac began to notice what didn't add up. The fire was there. The wood was there. Everything needed for a sacrifice was in place, except one thing. And in that quiet, observant way, he finally spoke. He said, "Father, we have the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb?" It's a simple question, but it lands with weight, because it exposes the gap between what Isaac sees and what Abraham knows. This is the moment where silence is no longer enough. An answer is required. Abraham doesn't explain. He doesn't reveal the full truth. Instead, he responds with something measured, controlled. God will provide the lamb. That statement isn't just for Isaac, it's for himself. It's belief spoken into a situation that offers no visible solution. He doesn't know how it will happen, or when, but he chooses to anchor himself in what he has already seen over the years, that God has never failed to follow through. And so they continue walking. The question lingers, but so does the trust. The altar of decision. When they reached the place, Abraham didn't hesitate. He began building the altar, stone by stone, each movement steady, almost methodical. There was no rush, no visible panic, just a controlled focus, as if he had already settled the outcome within himself long before this moment arrived. Then the scene shifts. The wood is arranged, the structure is complete, and now the unspoken becomes real. Abraham turns to Isaac. Scripture doesn't describe resistance, argument, or confusion in detail, but the silence itself is striking. Whether through trust or shock, Isaac allows himself to be bound. The son, who had once been the answer to a promise, is now placed on the altar built by his father's own hands. This is no longer about preparation. It's no longer about the journey. Everything has led to this point, where belief is no longer internal. It becomes visible. The altar isn't just a structure of stone. It's a place where faith and reality collide, and only one can remain in control. The edge of action. The moment had narrowed to a single point. Abraham stood over the altar, every step behind him leading here, every step ahead impossible to undo. Isaac lay bound, the silence now heavier than anything spoken. There was no more preparation left, no more distance to cover, only a decision to complete. Abraham reached for the knife. This is where belief stops being internal. Up to this point, faith could remain hidden, carried in thoughts, expressed in quiet obedience. But here it crosses into action. There's no visible sign, no interruption, no last-minute clarity. Just the weight of what he was about to do, held steady in his hand. And still he moved forward. Not because it made sense, not because it felt right, but because everything he had experienced before had taught him one thing, that God could be trusted, even when the outcome couldn't be understood. This was the edge, the exact moment where faith either holds or breaks. The interruption. At the exact moment Abraham moved to complete the act, a voice from God broke the silence and stopped him. Abraham froze, then pulled back. He did not continue. The command came with clarity and authority. He had to stop, and he obeyed immediately. The outcome changed in an instant, but the purpose of the moment had already been fulfilled. This was never about completing the sacrifice. It was about reaching the point where nothing held him back. Abraham did not hesitate at the edge. He carried the decision through to action, and that was enough. In that pause, everything became clear, not through explanation, but through what he had already done. The provision that follows. After he stopped, Abraham lifted his eyes and scanned the surroundings with new awareness. In that moment, he noticed something he had not seen before: a ram caught in a thicket, held in place, unable to move. The provision stood there, not created in that second, but already present, waiting to be recognized. Abraham acted immediately. He released Isaac, removed him from the altar, and took the ram instead. He completed the offering, but not with the son he brought, with the provision he was shown. This shift matters. The solution did not appear before the test. It became visible after Abraham reached the point of full obedience. He did not walk up the mountain with clarity, he walked up with trust. Clarity followed action. In that place, Abraham marked the moment, not as loss avoided, but as provision revealed. And that changed how the entire journey would be remembered. Why this test mattered. What happened on that mountain with Abraham and Isaac was not random, and it was not about loss. God did not need proof in the way humans do. The test did not inform God, it revealed Abraham to himself. For years, Abraham had believed, followed, and trusted, but belief often stays comfortable until it gets challenged at the level of what you value most. Isaac was not just his son. Isaac represented the promise, the future, the meaning behind decades of waiting. And that created a risk. When a promise becomes central, it can quietly replace the one who gave it. This test forced a separation. It brought Abraham to a point where he had to choose between holding onto the gift or staying aligned with the source of that gift. That distinction defines the entire moment. Abraham did not reject Isaac, he refused to place him above God. And that is the core of the test: priority, not sacrifice. There is also a structural pattern here that carries forward beyond this single event. Abraham did not receive full clarity before acting. He moved first, and understanding followed. The provision, the ram, did not appear at the beginning of the journey, and it did not remove the tension early. It became visible only after Abraham reached the limit of his obedience. That sequence matters because it shows that faith, in this context, does not eliminate uncertainty, it moves through it. The test also establishes something practical about trust. Abraham's decision did not come from blind impulse. It came from a long history of experience, years where he had seen promises delayed but not broken. That history shaped his response. When the moment demanded action, he relied on what had already been proven, not on what he could currently explain. In the end, the mountain becomes more than a location. It becomes a reference point, a moment where belief turned into action without guarantees, where attachment did not override alignment, and where provision followed commitment. Abraham did not walk away with less. He walked away with a clearer understanding of what his faith actually meant, because it had been tested at its highest level and did not collapse.